There's an African proverb that says, knowledge is like a garden. If it's not cultivated, it cannot be harvested. We live in a digital era where technology is transforming at a very fast speed. And beneath that transformation, or wave of transformation, lies a treasure of wisdom. It is a wisdom that has nourished us for generations. It has transformed communities, and it continues to hold the key to a sustainable future. But the problem is that that wisdom is slowly fading away. It is estimated that in 2 decades' time, that wisdom or traditional knowledge will have disappeared with the 2 generations behind us. As Africans, our way of life is a beautiful tapestry woven from the threads of our traditional wisdom that has inspired us for generations. Take the Ubuntu concept, I am because we are. A traditional wisdom that has inspired us throughout generations and continues to do so. So this is just not a fascinating topic. It's a call for action. What can we do to preserve our indigenous knowledge? What can be done to recollect the indigenous knowledge that we have lost? Growing up in Kenya, in the Luo community, and I was very glad to see the tilapia fish, because it's one of our traditional foods. I grew up in a community where culture and tradition richly informs our way of life. When I was young, I was a silent witness to a lot of our traditional practices, whether it was our traditional way of making food, whether it was crop production. And my grandmother was a very instrumental individual in how I viewed my traditions. And it still does inform the way I carry or my outlook towards life. Traditions such as seed preservation, or what we call nowadays seed banking, that was practiced for generations. And through that practice, we were able to sustain different varieties of traditional crops that are currently slowly disappearing. So we have forgotten our traditions in terms of preserving the knowledge that we have, whether it's the traditional crops that we had through seed banking. And my grandmother always had a store of seeds. And I remember I used to ask her, what seed is this for? What seed is this for? She always had a shelf full of seeds. Little did I know that that was her way of making sure that my generation still had access to our traditional vegetables. Little did I know that my mother would grow those vegetables using the same seeds that my grandmother preserved. And my mother also took up that tradition. She has her own shelves of seeds. And as a researcher, I sat down one day and I said, but what are we doing to preserve this knowledge? Because my generation hardly knows about this traditional knowledge. We are not even interested in agriculture. But we are the future generation. The current generation is even in a worse space. They do not know what traditional agriculture is about. We talk about organic food, but where does that stem from? It stems from our traditions, our way of farming. But we have forgotten the traditions behind our organic foods. Now, as a researcher in the digital transformation space, I thought about how we can leverage technology to preserve and document this traditional knowledge. Again, our traditions are based on oral transmission. So we talk about our traditions. But in the culture that we live in currently, how many of us talk to our grandmothers on a regular basis? And when we talk to them, do we talk to them about our traditions? No. So that oral transmission from one generation to another is slowly disappearing. We are more glued on our phones, what's happening on TikTok and so forth. But we can also leverage that to our advantage, to preserve the knowledge that we really, really need in the future of our agricultural production. So I did research to look at what can be done in terms of preserving our agricultural traditional knowledge. And not only preserving that, also to inspire the coming generation, the digital natives that have grown up with technology, the young farmers that are coming up in the next few generations, to look at agriculture from a different angle, to look at agriculture as a source of income and not just as a way of putting food on the table, but still using our traditional knowledge. So things like creating knowledge management systems that can be used as educational resources for the younger generation, where you have repositories that are created about different species of crops, the soil type that those crops do well in, under what weather do they do well in, and this young generation can actually put that into action. Whether it's in your small garden of your organic plantation or garden that you're trying to come up with, you can still apply that knowledge. Now, young farmers in our rural communities, there is at least one person with a smartphone. And we can leverage that if we have these indigenous knowledge management systems that creates, stores, and shares information. We can be able to tap into that and also be able to plow back and cultivate that knowledge for the common good of our generations to come. We also have researchers that have looked into drought management systems, specifically using drones. And those systems have been developed using traditional knowledge of the indicators farmers used to use to predict whether it was coming floods or droughts. Using that information and the modern way of forecasting can help tackle the challenges that we are facing in terms of agriculture production. So those are some examples that we can leverage the capabilities of technologies, especially for the younger generations, so that we can keep the younger generation interested in cultivating crops, in subsistence farming, or even farming for commercialization. But for me, the most interesting part of it is that we use the technologies to store that knowledge for the future generation. Let it not die with the previous generations, because that will be a great tragedy. As Africans, we have this concept of Africanization, decolonization, but in which areas are we focusing on? Are we focusing only on education, our social lives, but we are forgetting about the agriculture part? The food that we put on our tables, food sovereignty. Have we forgotten about those? Where I'm coming from, technology can be leveraged to store that information for the future generation. So for me, it's more than technology, actually. It's about taking pride in our culture, bridging generational gaps, information gaps, so that the future generation are aware of our traditional agricultural practices, so that we can maintain our food systems, not only for commercialization, but also for subsistence. Food security starts at individual households, not at the top. It will start with one family having enough food to eat, and not just enough food to eat, nutritious food to eat. And that's where food sovereignty comes in. Culturally appropriate food for families. It will move on to communities, and that grows up to regional development. And that is the only way we can tackle food insecurity. So my wish today is that we take pride in our African cultures that is rich and diverse, and take that and preserve it for our next generation. Our traditional and agricultural practices should be a beacon for the future and not a relic for the past. And that is my food for thought for this presentation. Thank you.